I want to welcome all of you today, and I'm so excited that you are joining us for what is FCA's sixth virtual conversation. We will be focusing on the issue of supporting children through the process of their parents going through a separation and divorce. I'm Rob Cashel, President and CEO of Family and Children's Agency, and I am delighted to moderate this conversation with a really distinguished panel of experts who we'll get into some important questions for them in just a couple of minutes. For those of you who don't know us, although I think many of you do, we are one of the largest nonprofit human service agencies here in Fairfield County. We work with children and families and adults and seniors through a variety of different programs, including foster care, a tremendous amount of work around the issues of child abuse prevention and support. We provide after-school programming. We work with the homeless. We work with seniors, and we even have a very highly regarded mental health and substance abuse area. And finally, an adoption program. Today's topic is a very important topic for all families, and it is focusing on the effects on children when parents go through a separation and divorce. There are a whole host of issues that children experience through this process. And I'm delighted to have the panelists with us today who will touch on this topic in just a couple of minutes. First, I'd like to introduce Tiffany McCarthy, who is a Senior Director here at Family and Children's Agency. Tiffany has been working in the field of supporting families in particular going through this process for well over 20 years. She is an expert in providing parenting education programs here in the state of Connecticut. She is the lead trainer for the Connecticut Council of Family Service Agencies in training others in this important model. She is also a trained facilitator for the Focus on Kids program, which helps parents deal with high conflict issues around separation and divorce. Great to have you with us, Tiffany. Also with us today is Maurice Siegel. Maurice is an attorney. He's the Deputy Director of Pro Bono Partnership, but another hat he wears is as a divorce mediator. And he has an extensive practice in this area, helping parents go through the process in a different way than the typical divorce process that can often be extremely conflictual through the process. So welcome, Mo. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. And then finally, Jessica Vivenzio, who is the Director of Behavioral Health here at Family and Children's Agency. Jess works extensively with families and children in a variety of treatment areas, including the area that we're going to talk about today. So welcome to you all. I'd like to start our process off by asking each of you to further introduce yourself and in particular, explain a little bit about the role you play in addressing this important issue. Mo, let's start with you.
Thank you, Rob, and to Tiffany and Jess for having me on this panel. So as Rob said, I have worked for almost 30 years as a divorce mediator, which is an alternative and I think a better way of going through the divorce process, where the clients, instead of parents who are getting divorced, rather than fighting and doing it in a litigious and adversarial way, work together, work cooperatively with the neutral person to help them try to reach an agreement that is best for their children and for themselves. And it's particularly helpful with, it can work for families or couples, whether they have children or not. It's particularly helpful for couples that have children, because as I tell them right from the outset, even if you're getting divorced and you're entering into a new phase, you're going to be talking to each other for the rest of your lives because you have this very important and common bond. So why not start out this next phase in this sort of separation process in a cooperative way, where you then can work together as parents, even if you're not husband and wife anymore. And you know, the sort of anecdotal history I get from clients who've gone through this, they've said it's been really terrific for them and for their families and for their children, in everybody's best interests.
Terrific. Thank you, Mo. Tiffany, tell us a little bit about your role in this area.
So as you shared, Rob, I've been doing the parent education program at Family and Children's Agency for just about 25 years. And within the parent education program, our goal really is to help support the parents that are supporting their children at home around the issues of the disruption. And, you know, a lot of what we talk about, you know, is not uncommon to just general parenting, but one of the things that I do share with parents is that when we are stressed because of something happening in our adult lives, it does have an impact on our children. So that is something that we look at with parents. The parent education program goes through various aspects of disruption, including, you know, how it impacts children depending on where they are developmentally, as well as in their brain development. You know, we look at how to reduce stress within the home because we know that stress is, you know, can be very corrosive. You know, stress and conflict can be very corrosive, you know, not only to the family system, but also to children in particular. And so, you know, hearing, you know, the amazing work that I know that Maurice does with families, you know, is really, really important because we really are hoping that we are going to be able to, you know, be part of the guiding factors for parents establishing that new relationship that they are establishing now, you know, going, you know, from partners defined in one way to business partners or co-parents. We use the analogy at times around the business partnership to just sort of take some of the emotion out of it and, you know, bring some logic in. You know, your business is your children. While that might seem sort of stale, that's really what we are doing. We are, you know, we're looking to, you know, really support and nurture our children, our business, as they, you know, are able to continue to grow and thrive, you know, hopefully in an environment that, you know, is not wrought with crisis and conflict. So it is an important bond that we are hoping that the parents will continue to, you know, respect and embrace. So.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Jess, how about a little bit about how you play a role in addressing this issue?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here again. And, you know, Tiffany and I have been working really diligently to identify the needs in the community that we serve within behavioral health at Family and Children's Agency. And with that, I really identifying the need to have additional supports for these kids who are dealing with a disruption in their family system. What we know, what Tiffany just spoke about, is that, you know, whether we are aware of it or not, our children pick up on everything that we are doing and feeling. And if we, as much as we might try to hide things, there are direct and indirect effects of a disruption within a family system. And we know that there is a significant impact on attachment, mood, self-image. And what we want at FCA is to be able to support the children and their parents in various different ways, from PEP to individual therapy to a new group for children that we are in the process of getting up and running.
Terrific. Terrific. Thank you all. So let's drill down a little bit on one of the things that Mo, you touched on, which is obviously divorce mediation in contrast to a traditional divorce. So somebody's thinking about maybe that as an alternative. Can you talk a little bit about some of the real differences in the process? And maybe you could also share, is there a difference in cost, for example? People often talk about divorce process potentially being very expensive, but a little bit more about the actual differences in the process.
Sure. There are a couple of different, thanks, Rob. There are a few different ways of going through the divorce process if that's a route a couple is taking. They can do it themselves, which some people choose to do, not that it's recommended. They can go the traditional route where each has a lawyer, and it's whether they have a trial or not, they're in a more of an adversarial litigative position where the lawyers are doing the heavy lifting, and that can get not only adversarial, but very expensive. There's the work that I do primarily, which is a mediator as a neutral, where both parties come to me. And the difference is rather than talking through lawyers, they're sitting at a table or in a Zoom room and talking to each other. And they are going through all this, the similar steps they have to do in a litigated divorce, but they're doing it in a different way. They're exchanging financial and other information directly and honestly, but voluntarily. They're not having their lawyers extract that information from each other. They're having discussions, guided discussions, guided discussions with the mediator's help to come to agreement on all the issues that they have to decide. There's what I call a hybrid of it called a collaborative divorce, which is another way where each party might have a lawyer, might have a mental health professional, might have a financial professional, might have a team of people, but they're working collaboratively to try to help the couple reach an agreement. What I tell clients from the outset when they're considering it is, look, chances are you're going to reach an agreement, very likely. Some cases go to trial. That's unfortunate. Those are the ones that are the most bitter, costly, and time consuming. So if you can do this in a better way where you're talking, as sort of Tiffany said, it's a business deal, which maybe takes the emotion out of it. But from a divorce standpoint, frankly, putting the important issue of children aside, it is a business deal. Often when you're talking about finances, you want to come to an agreement, which they will come to an agreement, hopefully that's fair, that's in everybody's best interest. And that is done, Rob, to your point, in a much, much, much more cost-effective way. You will spend likely a fraction of what you would spend in a litigated divorce case, which in Fairfield County can cost couple tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, which is just a horrible use of family resources. So because couple is speaking directly, they're paying professionals less to talk for them or work for them, and they're saving money for their family. So it does have that very big advantage of conserving resources for the family.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mo. And I would assume that that leads to a much better potential outcome after the process is complete. Because I've got to believe that if people are spending tens of thousands or even $100,000, there's a lot of resentment around that whole piece as well.
There's a lot of resentment. You're saving resources for your family. As one mental health professional once said to me, who recommends mediation, you can pay for your kids' college or your lawyer's kids' college. So your choice. But it does preserve resources and it helps you reach that fair agreement in a much more cooperative way. So it has a myriad of advantages to try to reach an agreement in a much more cooperative way.
Yeah, that's great. So Tiffany, you work with a lot of parents who are going through the divorce process through the state required program, Parenting Ed, which you explained. Do you see some couples now coming in who are choosing this option? And has that changed the flavor of some of the sessions that you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I love it when we are able to have, parents either that come to the parent education class together or separately. They don't need to come together, but when they are able to come together, they really, show the other parents who might be struggling a bit in their co-parenting what is possible. And I something that you said, Mo, just really struck me, that whole piece of, preserving family resources. That's so crucial because some of those resources are emotional resources, right? And so, when we are able to have families come into the program and demonstrate, a more advanced place in co-parenting, that, that also shows hope for the other parents that are involved. And who knows, maybe even gives them something to really sort of set as their goal. Because in the end, that is what we know is going to help children feel safe and secure during this process. This is a process that, looks different for every family. There's no cookie cutter way to describe family divorce or disruption. We know that there are some commonalities in it, but there's also so many unique pieces to it, what children are experiencing, what the parents are experiencing. And so I think that, yeah, absolutely. I think the mediated process is really very beneficial, and we are seeing an increase in it. So the good work that's happening.
And Tiffany, I tell my clients right at the outset of the meeting that not only do they have to take the course, they absolutely should take the course, and that they should take it together. I recommend that because I think it does show it for other people. And I tell folks you're hearing the same information from the same good provider at the same time, and that's a benefit if you can do it.
Absolutely. And I think that parents will take from the class, things that we say, not everything is going to hit home for them, because there's a wide range, as I said, of issues, but also, we have parents that come in that have very young children, and then parents that come in that are launching their kids into their next phase of their lives. So, not everything is going to necessarily hit home, but, being able to be in the room together, absolutely. And then, take with them, maybe some future discussion points around, we need to think about things. I always ask the parents that come into our program that, to be open-minded, to understand that, we want them to, be able to glean new ideas, but also we hope that we're going to validate some of the stuff that they're already doing, because there's power in that. They're the experts on their children. We know a lot about kids, I tell them, but they're the experts, and we want to honor that, but also guide them through this process.
Yeah.
I think
So, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jess.
I was just going to say, I think from a behavioral health perspective, it's important and could be incredibly beneficial if the parents are able to take the class together, because then we're also ensuring that the message that the children receive are similar. We want to make sure that they are getting the same type of messaging from both parents in a positive and strengths-based way.
Terrific. So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the issues that children face. But before we do, Mo, you've been doing this work, divorce mediation, for quite some time. Have you found that more and more people are now choosing this as an option?
If I can gauge that by how busy my schedule is, sure. It's hard for me to tell. Look, there's still plenty of people, unfortunately, to take a litigated approach. And I think that's always going to be the case. I think, to your question and Tiffany's point, more people are doing it, or more people, even if they're not using mediation, are looking for an alternative way of going through the process, whether it's collaboration, whether it's mediation, because they realize the benefits of working, even though it's a division now of the marriage, of working cooperatively to attain that division. Yes, I think it's becoming more and more accepted. It's more and more accepted in the courts. In fact, the court, as of a couple of years ago, you still have to engage the court. It's the court that divorces you. But I tell one of the other advantages I tell folks is, if you use mediation, your interactions with the court are kept down to a minimum. In fact, you don't even have to show up for a court hearing. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but you can file papers to get divorced. And the court has a form now that they want people to fill out that says, if you're going through a collaborative or mediated divorce, please tell us and give us the information so we can note that in your file. I do think it's becoming more accepted and used.
Yeah. Well, I think you've all noted two key things for me, two key takeaways. One, this alternative, could certainly lessen the emotional cost of going through this process, and also the economic cost. And those sound like two very, very good reasons to look at this as a very important option. So let's switch a little bit here and talk very specifically about children, because today really is, focused on the disruption in the family, but in particular, how this disrupts children in their family life. And Tiffany, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the key issues that you think children, and not all children are the same, but what are some of the key issues that, generally speaking, children face when their parents are going through a separation and divorce?
I think, feeling, uncertain. What does this mean? Although they're given information, they're not necessarily given information that they're emotionally prepared for. And so, for young children, there might be some real fears that are not, necessarily based in reality, right? What their little minds believe to be true can be true to them. And so being very aware of that, for parents, so that they are giving information to children that is age appropriate, that they're not overwhelming the children with a lot of unnecessary information, because that's going to help them process their feelings. There's so many feelings that children will experience. And I tell parents that it doesn't always make sense how they are feeling, or maybe even how they're expressing their feelings, but we have to be able to help support that. We have to be present with them, so that, they have the ability to understand and work through the feelings, so that they, again, feel safe. One of the things that I share with my parents, it's a recent quote that I found that I thought was, pretty powerful. And it says, when little people are overwhelmed with big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join in their chaos. And I think, for some kids, does feel a little chaotic and frantic. For parents, it can also. And so it is a job for the parents to understand that, where are they in their own chaos and their own, processing of what's happening, so that they can be present, or, reach out to other folks in their lives, whether it be what I call natural supports, our family and friends, or more formal supports, the supports that Jess talked about, that we are trying to make sure are available for families. I think is really, really very important for children.
Jess, I'm going to guess that you would probably share many of the thoughts that Tiffany had. Anything you want to expand on?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with everything that Tiff said. And I think it's really important to acknowledge too how much growth and learning happens for kids, especially between the ages of, 0 and 6, right? And in that time, they are not only learning what emotions are, but they are in the process of trying to figure out how to regulate them. And chaos or lack of structure or lack of routine does not feel safe. And that can bring up really big feelings like Tiffany talked about. And when we are feeling really big feelings and we are not regulated, we inadvertently end up creating those feelings for our kiddos too. And the more regulated that we are, the more regulated that we can help the children to be. And that is a really incredibly important piece of this as well.
Rob,
Go ahead, please.
I would just add on to that, I'm not sure we've used the word consistency, and it goes exactly along with what Jess is saying. That's such a crucial piece too. And again, I said earlier, this is so much of what we are talking about, and what we want parents to just recognize is that, basic parenting, or what I call parenting 101, and we all do it differently, but these are things that should be embedded in a child's life. We know, again, when we go back to the feeling safe and secure, that's going to make them feel safe and secure. So I just wanted to add that word.
Sure. Important. Mo, do you see this brought into some of your mediations, this issue of my child is dealing with issues. What do I do?
A little bit, I will say, generally speaking, and fortunately, I find the parents who are mediating have less parenting issues.
Hmm.
They're a lot of times they're very aligned on parenting, not always. But when issues come up, if they're having them with their children, I will tell them that I'm not a mental health professional, and I will refer them to people like Jess or Tiffany who have the expertise to deal with those questions. But it's more often the financial issues that are a question for the folks who are mediating than issues about parenting. Now, that said, I'll tell folks all the time, you're gonna butt heads, when you parent, but it would have happened if you were married anyway. You're gonna have different parenting styles, and that's not going to change.
Right.
Acknowledge that.
So we have an interesting and one might say tough question for you all from the audience. And the question that's coming our way is, what are some of the tools for kids with divorced parents who do not get along? Who wants to jump on that one?
I'll take it. There's not a perfect answer. I will, that's not an uncommon question that we get. And I always say, I unfortunately, my magic wand ran out of batteries and I can't get them refilled. So there, for us to sort of understand that piece to it, and that, one thing that we need to keep in mind is that we can only control our own self, right? So what we say and what we do. And so, for kids, that is something that we can give them. That, again, going back to consistency and really working very hard to, obviously keep the conflict out of the child's world as much as possible. And, again, just being present with our kids as they experience this, there's such amazing value to that, that we are able to tolerate, the feelings and emotions and responses that our children share with us. And we do it in a way that's quiet. We're not, trying to solve problems. We are not trying to, talk over them. We're just present with them. That is so important for children. And then obviously, again, just trying to understand and be mindful of our own behaviors and actions, and that we can't control the other person. So, Jess, I bet you probably have a little more.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I can't stress enough how important it is and the value in seeking support, whatever that looks like. It's not therapy for everyone. It's not group therapy for everyone, but seeking support in your own lives, within family, within friends, within community. It can be church, it can be a book club, but finding supports for yourself so that you are not feeling as though you are isolated and trying to go through this process on your own, because it can feel very isolating and it can feel really challenging and frustrating and hurtful to be going through a contentious divorce process with someone that did mean something so emotionally strong to you in one way or another in the past. And so it's incredibly important that when we remember, like Tiffany was talking about, this co-parenting being a business relationship with your well-being, emotional well-being, and the well-being of your child being at the forefront. Sometimes that means, I don't like hearing this either, even though it's coming out of my mouth, but sometimes that means picking our battles and looking at, is this fight, is this argument worth it? Is it worth whatever the outcome could be?
Yeah. Good point. So let me ask all of you, something I am aware of that is not uncommon when a divorce process happens, a more traditional divorce process, is there are times where one parent, or maybe both parents, want to talk through their child to the other parent. I've got to believe you've all experienced that in one way or another. And Tiffany, why don't I start with you, because that might come up sometimes in the group where you begin to realize, wait a minute, there's something going on here that may not be in the best interest of the child.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is still, definitely a dynamic that we see in our work with parents and with children that we are talking with. And I think, one of the things that I remind parents is that when your child is put in the middle, that is creating an example of a loyalty conflict. Children have the right to love both parents, and when they're put in the middle, they're caught, like, not sure what their relationship should be with one or both of their parents. And then there's also when they are asked to convey messages or be part of that dynamic, then they are also holding the outcome of that, which is usually not a great outcome. And so, when parents ask, what do I do when my child comes to me, and they've obviously been given a lot of information about the situation, I think first and foremost, that's really awful. I think validating, for the parent who's asking me that question, just confirming if they need that. Yeah, that's not what we hope to happen. And then trying to refocus the parent on thinking about, in that moment, what does my child need to know? Maybe what do they want to know? So we understand both of those things. But then also, what do I want them to know? But what do I need them to know? Right? Because so often we're put in a position where we're trying to defend ourselves against the words or actions of the other parent. And again, that's not going to help our kids. So we need to refocus back on, how in this moment am I going to give my child information that is going to help them feel safe and secure? How am I going to answer their question by not answering their question? So helping them to understand why there's information that I'm not going to share with them, but, we don't just say, well, I will not answer your question, or that's a stupid question, or whatever might, possibly cross our mind as an option to say. But we are going to help them understand there's a lot of dynamics going on right now, a lot of emotions. You have shared emotions, I have emotions about this, the other parent has emotions or feelings about this. And right now, the most important thing I can do is just to tell you how loved you are. And then maybe I'm going to go through, different things that the child needs to know about their place in this. It might be, just about, where they're going to be, going to school or living, and, really going back to those basic things that create that sense of security for children. I say to parents, sometimes we talk to the children about what's going on, and we give them, we're getting a divorce, or we're separating, we're not going to be living together. And the child will say, okay, what's for dinner? They just want to know that they're going to be taken care of. They might want to know where the family dog is going to live. Who's going to feed my fish? Am I still going to be able to play baseball? Understanding, these are the things that is important for them. So
That's great. Thank you, Tiffany. Jess, Mo, have you seen this come up in your work where a parent or parents are choosing to use their child as the message giver or receiver?
Absolutely. I think it's more common than we even want to admit. And to Tiffany's point, the loyalty conflict is so heavy for kids to carry, regardless of if they are young kids or if they're 17. Those are really heavy emotions to have to hold, and not only heavy, but they're also, it can be really conflicting. If I do this, will I make mom upset? If I do this, will I make dad upset? And I think what can be really helpful is reminding ourselves, like Tiffany mentioned, that we can't control what the other person does. All we can do is control the messaging that we are giving to those kids. And even if the other person is trying to talk through that child, sitting there with the child and validating whatever it is that they're sharing, validating whatever it is that they are feeling about this process. And, you know, the idea that co-parenting can be one of the most challenging things that we might end up doing. But what I have seen clients do in the past that has been successful is really looking at the child and the role that the child has in this relationship. They're not a parent. They are not part of the relationship. They were created probably out of this relationship somehow many years ago, right? But taking the child out as a communication option entirely. So if the child wasn't here, how would I communicate with this person? And we can get really creative with that. It doesn't have to be phone calls. It can be a notebook that gets passed back and forth from home to home. You know, it can be emails. It can be kind of whatever that looks like, but the importance of taking the child out as an option to communicate through. It can help with long-term outcomes for that kiddo.
Yeah. And Mo, you already noted that many, if not most of the parents who come seeking mediation are maybe in a better place than some other divorcing couples relative to the parenting issue. Does it come up sometimes, though, where you have a parent that maybe is either directly or indirectly using the child as a way to communicate with the other? You're on mute.
Sorry, it
It's
probably
okay.
does come up less in my work than it does with Tiffany's work and Jess's work. It will come up sort of anecdotally. But I'll, try to relay the message, right? Do not use your child as the messenger. Talk respectfully about the other parent in a divorce agreement, because it all gets memorialized in an agreement. And if parents are going to have joint legal custody, which means regardless of where the children live, the parents are going to make major decisions about the children together. There's very important language in there which sets the tone about how they're supposed to act. They're going to be respectful to each other. They're not going to disparage each other. They're going to freely share information about the children with each parent. They're going to contact the other person if there is an emergency. They're going to be flexible in how they work with their children. So some people will come to me and say, we know that the ones that are getting on, we know this stuff already. We work together, but it's good to see it anyway in writing. So it sort of sets the tone for how they're supposed to act. Don't use the children as pawns if you're not getting along. If you're having a disagreement, do not bring the children into your disagreement. Don't badger the children about information about mom or dad. It's not their role to share that with you.
Yeah.
So it does come up.
Yeah, so it sounds like setting ground rules is a big part of the work, and being very clear and even formal about those ground rules. Let me ask you all another thing that I know happens, which is whether there's joint custody or more likely maybe one person has custody and the other parent has visitation. And maybe the visitation is such that the parent is supposed to pick up their son or daughter at a particular time. They either don't show up, they don't show up on time. It obviously has an effect on the child, and clearly has an effect on the parent, who is left to have to explain to the child. Any guidance that you all have? Because this is a tough one, because if you're the parent, you're the one with the child, and you can see your child is in pain and is disappointed, and that whole balance about maybe not wanting to bash, if you will, the other parent. So any thoughts from you all on that one?
I think that this could very much be an example of how we can help teach our kids how to manage distress, right? Distress tolerance is a really important skill that all of us have. It's something I think a lot of us work on. If you are in therapy on your own, it's something that comes up very often. And I think in this situation, it's really incredibly important, again, to make sure that we are regulated. Because if we are showing our children how frustrated we are, or angry, or sad, or all of the above, it is that much more difficult to help them understand how to manage that distress in an appropriate way. And again, utilizing our own supports to help us manage those feelings, and then maybe looking at like what the legal proceedings are in that case long term, if it's an issue. But in terms of, emotions and mental health, really making sure that the child does not hear all of the negative things that we might be feeling or thinking ourselves.
Thank you. Tiff, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would add, I completely agree regarding distress tolerance and how do we help children develop that. I think also, one of the things that, that example you gave, Rob, is a perfect example of the games that parents play, right, with each other, to get under their skin. They know how to push each other's buttons. And what I often recognize and share with parents is that the games, these acts that are geared at either, scaring the other parent, annoying the other parent, maybe all of the above, really come out of a place of control, right? And so, recognizing that, where we fall in our own, actions to try to control an unmanageable situation, or one that we feel is unmanageable. Children have the same response. They're looking to try to control a very unmanageable situation. And one of the things that we talk about is, how do we, take sort of depersonalize it, and look at behaviors that are creating this stress or this distress, right? What is the behavior? And then helping children to develop some skills around managing behaviors. That sometimes is a workaround that we can offer to parents, because they want to go to the emotional piece. They want to do some character attacking of the other parent in these moments, but that's not going to help our kids, but we also want to be able to validate our child's experience, and I think looking at the behaviors that, the child is experiencing or part of, right, helps in that. Hopefully it also, encourages the parent in the moment, like, I don't want to put my child in a similar position. So what do I need to be aware of my coping mechanisms in this point in time? Jess talked about, parents have to figure out what is their support system, what is their way to self-care, to self-soothe themselves during this time, and there's lots of things that can help. And I think if we are able to do that as adults in the child's life, it's like when when you're flying in an airplane and they say, if we lose cabin pressure, the air masks are going to come down. We're told we have to put those masks on ourselves first before we help whoever we're traveling with, and that it's the same principle in parenting. If we're not taking care of ourselves and figuring out how to manage these behaviors and demonstrating that to our children, then we're not helping our kids. We are just furthering their, distress over this situation. So,
Right. Well, thank you. And it occurs to me, Mo, we talked about the process you take a couple through in setting ground rules. And it occurs to me that this would be, I would guess, sort of a violation of a ground rule, right? That there's been something put in place, formalized, that says this is how you're going to relate to each other in terms of visitation and all of that. Is that kind of a fair way of?
Those are part of the ground rules, and the conversation made me think of something I tell parents when it comes to a parenting plan, and it boils down to the word of flexibility. So while it is disrespectful for one parent to be there at a certain time and they're not, or they forget, and it's disrespectful to the other parent and to the child, if parents are too exacting in a parenting plan, they're setting themselves up for failure. So while there needs to be some structure, in my view, around a plan, rather than just say, dad will see the kids when dad wants to see the kids, that may be a little bit too loose. The opposite extreme is saying, dad will see the kids, from 3 o'clock this day to 4 o'clock this day, and they have every day mapped out to the minute. It's not going to work that way. So I tell parents flexibility is key. And I tell them also, whatever parenting plan you put into place for your children, you're not going to follow it. Meaning it will change as the kids get older and their needs change and your needs change. And the court isn't looking over your shoulder to see if you're following every word you put down. So you need to be flexible. That's best for you and best for your children. Because as the children get older, while they're still minors, they have more of a say, right, about where they want to be. It doesn't mean they have the final say, but parents need to be adaptable.
Great.
And that's put into, usually that kind of language is put into a written document.
One of the issues that all children at all ages seem to face is the issue of, did I have anything to do with this? Did I have anything to do with this separation, this divorce? And I think we've all been taught that it's important for children to hear at whatever age, essentially it's not their fault. But is that enough? Is that enough for a child to hear, even repeatedly over and over again, this is not your fault? Is there more that can be said, and is there more to support children who struggle with that question?
I think this is such an important question, Rob. So I'm so grateful that you brought this to us. And I think we have to be so aware that an automatic thought for many, not all, but many kids, when there's any type of disruption in the family system, they are going to say, is it because of me? Was I not good enough? Did I not listen enough? Right. And that is something that we all, I think, very much need to be aware of. And as much as it's incredibly important for us to connect to our supports, this is where it's incredibly important that we are creating a routine and structure for those kids with their supports. And that can look like a lot of different things. That can look like community supports, sports teams. That can look like visitation with the partners. But we want to make sure that there is a good amount of predictability, right? Like Tiffany said earlier, knowing what they're having for dinner feels like such a simple thing, but it's something that helps them to feel in control and safe. Predictability can equal safety for these kids. And I've had a lot of clients come through behavioral health in our variety of programs. And something that I think is incredibly important to mention is that staying together with a partner where there's conflict and contentious feelings is just as unhealthy, if not more unhealthy, than it is to be good, successful co-parents. So being together in a family system that is unhealthy can be incredibly damaging. So knowing that we're separating, we're divorcing, but if as parents, you're able to work together in a way to support you and the children, that is going to have much better, more successful long-term effects for you and for the kids, for the family system as a whole.
That's great.
Jessica, I'll second that, where I've seen from folks, they'll say, well, we've stayed together for the benefit of the children, but it's actually been to the detriment of the children. And they would have been better. The children probably would have been better off had the parents separated and worked cooperatively and friendly than staying in a bad relationship.
I think it's very important just to make sure that parents, are aware that even if their children are not saying it, they might have these thoughts too. So I always tell parents, just assume that maybe in their heads, they have some of these thoughts. So we give them general information, just like, we all are successful when we have information that maybe we didn't think we needed or hadn't thought of yet, giving them. And that's one of the things, that's an example of what I will, encourage parents to sort of embed in their regular conversations, that, divorce is something that certainly happens to families, but it's really about the adults, and that children sometimes feel like there's something that they did or something that they can undo to make a change in this dynamic. We have to recognize that's also part of the grieving process that children are going through, just like parents. What can I do to change the outcome of this? That's very real. And I think it's, again, it's, really important information that we make sure we share with children, just like, regardless of what they might be seeing in the changing dynamics of their parents and the parents' relationship, it's complicated, but even though parents can appear to sort of stop loving each other, parents never stop loving their kids, and that the love that, parents have for their children just continues to grow and grow. And, when I'm talking to parents or I talk to children about this, I said, it's kind of weird, isn't it? That in sometimes love feels like it ends, but in the love between a parent and a child doesn't end. You can't make that end. So
Terrific. Thank you all. That was really helpful responses from each of you. I know we're coming down the home stretch of our process, and I'm going to ask a question that I'm sure you all could talk about extensively, but I think it's important because we're talking about how children are affected, how they process a divorce. And clearly there are differences between how, say, an older child, a teenager processes and a young child processes. So this is a two-parter, maybe a little bit from each of you on how an older child versus a younger child processes a divorce. And the second is, what resources are available for kids out there, regardless of the age, young children, older children. So.
you want me to start?
Go for it, Tiff.
I think younger children, obviously, their understanding of life is certainly not as defined and mature as an older child. So I think, understanding that their response to changes within their family dynamics might be, more nonverbal. We can see regressive behaviors with little guys. We can see acting out behaviors, children that struggle to regulate those emotions because they just don't have the experience to do that. This is especially important when we are really looking at, very targeted information for these children, not to overwhelm them with a lot of details. Older children, they have more of a capacity to perhaps take on more details, but that doesn't mean that they should, so again, it's really important what we are, determining is the information that even older kids want and need. And also understanding that older children sometimes are trying to assume the role to take care of this issue, right? Control the issue. I used the word control before. We see that with older kids who think that they can somehow negotiate their parents' relationship, fix their parents' relationship, maybe, do some of the good work that Mo's doing to try to get them, to be on the same page. And so I think being aware of that dynamic is super important. So Jess, I know you.
Absolutely. So I think just to Tiffany's point, whether it's a younger child who is 5 and an older child who's 15, the core emotions are probably very similar, but the way in which that those emotions are demonstrated or the way in which they come out in terms of behavioral issues can be very different, right? And every 15-year-old who's going through a family disruption might respond differently, the same way that a 5-year-old might respond differently from any other 5-year-old. So I think it's incredibly important that we acknowledge what they are feeling. And to what Tiffany said, I think making the assumption that this is impacting them in some way is going to benefit us and benefit them in the long term, because we will be able to then step in and say, let's identify resources for you. Best case scenario, you engage them in resources and supports and they don't need it, right? And then they can stop, and it's not something that needs to be ongoing. But not providing resources can be detrimental, especially for the younger kids. Like I've mentioned, I know I've talked a lot about resources, but individual family therapy, group therapy, we're starting a new family disruption group for kids. We're going to be focusing on helping them identify their emotions, grounding skills, distress tolerance, how to communicate their feelings. I think that could be a really great resource. We're hoping that that's a really great resource, especially for some of Tiffany's PEP families. But it can also be church groups or school sports groups, or it can kind of look like anything. So again, your children better than anybody else does. So trying different things and helping them to find an outlet is really important.
And Mo, on your end, obviously, making available resources beyond the important service you provide must be an important piece.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have much more to offer than my esteemed colleagues who deal with this more on a hands-on basis. I sort of two related comments. One is, don't use the children as pawns to share information. That don't use them as your messenger. If you have something, keep them out of that conversation. Your conversations or issues with your spouse or ex-spouse are the two of yours, and that not your children. And two, take the take the PEP class. Take the PEP class early. I've had parents who take it and say, gosh, I wish I had taken this before I had children, because it can be an invaluable resource for the parents, and then sort of indirectly to benefit the children.
Well said.
Oh, I just want to add also as another avenue for parents that might be struggling a bit, during this process, but also post, court proceedings, is also our Focus on Kids program, which, really helps parents to, again, just redirect into hopefully a healthier co-parenting relationship, making decisions. It's very direct work around, what the kids need and how the parents need to work together to ensure that need is recognized. So.
Well, and I think it's pretty obvious that you would all strongly agree that parents really need to be focusing on their own depression, their own anger, their own sadness as they go through the process, because if they do not, then they're not going to be able to be there for their children. I see a lot of nodding of heads.
And as sort of maybe perhaps closing, because I know we're getting close. I always tell people when they come in that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's good to realize that. And if you can get to that place where you can have a cooperative agreement with your spouse, and you get to the other side, you're going to feel better. They're going to feel better about themselves, and it's going to be much, much, much better for their children.
Absolutely. So as Mo said, we are coming to a close. And by the way, you've led to an unbelievable number of questions that have come from the audience. Some of them we got to, some of them we did not. Some have even asked, is there a part 2 to this conversation? So I applaud you all. You have been absolutely terrific. Any closing comments that any of you would like to make as we wrap up this very important session?
Keep your children's interests first. When my parents come to me to get divorced, I said the most important issue you're going to deal with, the one's about your children. They're not your finances, they're about your children.
I think just being open and being present with your kids is just so important. Again, what we're probably already doing with our children, but when we're stressed, we sometimes forget the basics. And so that love and that presence for our kids, is so crucial for them during this time.
And at the end of the day, we can't take care of anyone else if we're not taking care of ourselves. So,
Yeah. Well, we have reached the end of our virtual conversation. Thank you all so very much. We will look to the future and maybe do some kind of a follow-up session, but I can't thank you enough, all three of you. You've done a fabulous job in talking about a very difficult process. And I think, Mo, as you said, there can be a light at the end of the tunnel, but keeping that focus on the children and what their needs are without ignoring the fact that parents need to also look at what's going on for them. So thank you all. And thank you all for tuning in to this virtual conversation. Take care.